Everyone. Welcome to our Redwood Rise Region webinar on an overview of new market tax credits. John Penkower, our speaker today, is with CSCDA, and as he goes through the presentation, he'll tell you a little bit about CSCDA and some of the affiliate organizations such as CSCDC, which does the new market tax credits, and CSCDA CIA, which is involved with housing. And there are other programs as well that this organization does, such as infrastructure funding, housing, healthcare, a variety of things. So while we're focusing today on new market tax credits, there are other financial programs that CSCDA and CSCDC are involved with. But with that, let me turn it over to John, and he can tell us a little bit about what's going on at his organization and what's going on with new market tax credits.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Josh, for including me today. Big thanks to Redwood Region Rise and RGS. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've worked on it for a long time. It is complicated. It's confusing. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So I'm really pleased to spend some time with you today, and we can dig a little bit deeper. I've got a slide deck here. I'm going to stop a lot and pause for questions if you want to just speak up or enter them into the chat. So by no means is this going to just be a lecture without an interactive component. So with that, I'm John Penkower. I've been with CSCDA for 17 years, working on a variety of programs. We offer quite a lot of different tools for cities and counties and community-oriented projects within cities and counties throughout California. I created the New Markets Tax Credit Program back in 2010-11, and it's been a very interesting road, wildly successful, we think, throughout the state. It's one of the deepest subsidies that's available out there, and so really excited to dig in deeper. So first, make sure that I can advance my slides. So here's an agenda of what we're going to talk about today. In order to get to CSCDC, I need to introduce CSCDA. I'll do that briefly. Brian already teed that up for us. We'll talk a little bit about new markets tax credits. What are they? How do they work? What are eligible projects? How do you become an eligible project? And then we're going to dig into how it benefits the project financially. We'll talk about some limitations within the program. And then we'll talk about some projects, both in your region and others throughout the state that we've been working on recently. And then obviously have time at the end for questions, but don't feel that you need to save them for the end. We can stop along the way, and I've got the access to the chat here. So CSCDC, we use a lot of acronyms, unfortunately, and they can overlap a little bit. When we get into new markets, they use even more acronyms. But CSCDC stands for the California Statewide Communities Development Corporation, which is a twist on a nearly 40-year joint powers authority, which is our controlling entity, CSCDA. Some of you may be familiar with the California Statewide Community Development Authority. CSCDC was created back in 2010-11 to facilitate this specific program. But CSCDA has been providing financing tools to cities and counties since 1988. And it was a creation of the League of California Cities and CSEC, the Counties Association. Initially, back in the late 80s, it was designed to provide industrial development bonds for projects throughout the state. Interestingly enough, we haven't issued an IDB in about 13 or 14 years, just because those rules have become so antiquated under that program. But since that time, CSCDA has taken off in a variety of different directions. One of the largest multifamily affordable housing issuers in the state. We have a robust 501c3 nonprofit bond program. As Brian mentioned, we have infrastructure financing tools for home builders throughout the state. That's a very active program right now. We're comprised of 530 cities and counties throughout California. That's pretty much most of them. and have issued north of $75 billion in bonds. So this little known state joint powers authority is actually one of the largest bond issuers in the nation. Any questions about CSCDA before we move on to new markets? Okay. Now
John, this is Josh. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Just you work exclusively with local jurisdictions, so other organizations, NGOs, or tribes, can they access your programs?
Yes. So CSCDA, many of our bond programs are conduit programs. And so we serve as the conduit issuer for ultimately a nonprofit organization, a tribe, a for-profit developer for housing projects. And so there's both the public sector and private sector that can take advantage of these various programs. IDBs, I mentioned early on, those are for private manufacturers. And so essentially any entity that can take advantage of tax-exempt financing, whether it's private activity bonds for the private sector, 501c3 bonds, private sector, and then we have a variety of public programs as well, directly for cities and counties. We have a leasing program for both equipment and real estate for cities and counties. We have a program for road enhancement dollars. And then throughout the years, we've also put together program-specific platforms. You may recall vehicle license fee securitization. This is probably 15 years ago. We did Prop 1A when the state took property taxes from cities and counties. So we've done a variety of different interesting securitizations over the years for cities and counties.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So I'm just looking through the chat here. All right, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of today's presentation. So CSCDC is a community development entity. It's a nonprofit entity that is controlled by CSCDA, has the same governing body, of which Mr. Mora is our current chair of CSCDA, as well as the president of CSCDC. And he convenes all of our meetings, which take place, at least twice per month. CSCDC has been pretty successful under this program. It's a very competitive program, not only for us, but for projects seeking the new markets allocation. So our first award was in 2013, a little over 10 years ago, and we have received 6 awards for a total of $313 million in allocation. We have currently closed 25 projects. We have about 3. We just kicked off another 4th that are in progress right now. We have received awards the last 3 years. So pretty exciting, active time for CSCDC. We facilitate projects all throughout the state of California. There are other CDEs that may focus just on one particular city. For instance, the cities of San Francisco, San Diego, LA, and Oakland used to have one. They have their own CDEs that just facilitate projects within their jurisdiction. You have multi-state CDEs, you have national CDEs. Many of the CDFIs that also have other lending programs serve as a CDE throughout the nation. We focus solely on California. And most importantly, we try to prioritize projects that are not within those large major metropolitan areas where they have their own CDE. So this is more of the, sometimes we use the phrase, the forgotten California in our applications. And so we've been successful in deploying the allocation from top to bottom, from the very far north, Oregon border down to Imperial County. And then within the program, we focus on 3 main areas as far as project types. And a little bit later, you'll see this program can be used in a wide variety of areas. We focus on manufacturing, education-oriented projects, job training, et cetera. And then healthcare is a very large area for CSCDC. So this program started back in the Clinton administration as a way of getting dollars into low-income communities throughout California. They set it up instead of just a typical grant program as a more complicated structure, but that one that encourages many private dollars for every public dollar of subsidy that's provided by U.S. Treasury. So the biggest, you mentioned early on that, part of this group is jobs first. Job creation is probably the foremost community impact of the new market tax credit program. Obviously, there's other really important community impacts, providing access to education and quality healthcare for underprivileged populations. But you'll see when we go through projects that job creation is first and foremost. This program is run through U.S. Treasury. The CDFI fund is an arm of the U.S. Treasury Department, and they administered the application process for us to seek allocation, as well as all the ongoing compliance, rules and regulations. And they administer a competitive award generally every year. There's been 19 different rounds to date. I think our first year might have been round 8 or 9. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but you see there on the slide that every dollar that the feds invest into this program, it encourages an additional $8 in private investments. So I think it's been, the jury's no longer out. It's been a really successful program, very strong bipartisan support. In Washington, D.C., it's not a controversial or partisan type of program. It does need to be reauthorized. And so it does not have permanent status, but it has been successful in being reauthorized. Some years it's every year as part of a tax extenders bill at the end of the year. More recently, we've been able to get 3 to 5 year extensions at a time, and then increasing the amount of allocation, adjusting for inflation over the years. So there's a constant lobbying effort to get permanent status for the new markets plan. Unfortunately, there's nothing's easy in Washington, D.C. right now, and so it hasn't received a lot of global attention, but that is the hope by many that have been in the industry. So the way this program works is U.S. Treasury doesn't allocate directly to project sponsors, to eligible projects. They allocate to the CDEs and the CDFI funds, and then we go through that application process, and then in turn vet eligible projects and provide the new market tax credits to those that are providing community impacts in highly distressed census tracts throughout the state of California. I'm just monitoring the chat here. And if you have a question, it won't be thought of as rude as all. Just interrupt me at any point. So the way certain CDEs focus on different types of projects, some might do home ownership. I mentioned that kind of that trifecta that we focus on of education, manufacturing, healthcare. We think these are really important sectors to focus on. There's ongoing compliance within this program to demonstrate each year the impacts, the jobs that are created, the additional low-income populations that are being served by a project. So it's a pretty robust tool, but it's not free money. It does come with quite a number of obligations that we'll dig into here in a little bit. I mentioned early on this is a competitive program. Initially for us, we don't get allocation every year. We've got 6 awards, but we have applied, I think, 12 times. In fact, we were shut out 3 years in a row during the prior administration, and we could have given up. It was pretty frustrating. The application is around 200 or so hours of work, but we hung in there, and a good thing we did because we've now received 3 awards in a row. And California, interestingly enough, has last year been deemed an underserved state in the program. And sometimes nationally people don't realize that California has one of the highest poverty rates in the country. But many people out of state just picture Golden Gate Bridge and the beaches in Southern California and San Diego. And I mentioned earlier that Forgotten California, that's part of what we stress in our applications when we're seeking new markets credits. So not only is this program competitive for the CDEs, it's generally anywhere from 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 5 would receive an award in any given year. But for projects that are seeking the allocation, it's also very, very competitive. There are dozens and dozens of projects for only a limited amount of allocation. So in any given year, if we have, let's say this last year, we received a $60 million award, which is a pretty sizable award. But that's only going to finance 5 to 6 projects overall. So some say 10 times oversubscribed. I'd say it's at least 6, 7, 8 times oversubscribed. And so the CDs are looking for those projects that have the most demonstrable benefit to the constituents wherever that project is located. Okay, so I have a variety of different slide decks for this program, and they have quite a number of different charts and graphs. And when we work on these programs, I mentioned it's a complicated process. It is the Full Employment Act for attorneys and accountants to put these structures together. It works really well, but if you looked at one of the organization charts, it would probably scare everyone away. So I have tried to eliminate much of the confusing parts, and I'm going to try to illustrate this in the most simplistic way that I think I can do it. But please feel free to stop along the way. So we're right there in the middle, the CDE, which is really the hub of the wheel, and then you have different spokes that go to various parties that are involved in the transaction. And at the end of the day, I mentioned earlier that it's not free money. It actually really is. It's free money in a complicated legal structure. It is probably the deepest subsidy that I'm aware of for these type of community projects, because it doesn't have to be repaid. So what you're looking at here is the CDE here in the middle, applying for allocation. I mentioned that earlier. We're the first part of the process, and we'll get an award from the CDFI fund. And so now we're flush with $55 or $60 million in allocation, and then we're going to go seek projects from another acronym, which is the project sponsor. And that is often referred to as the QualiC-B, or the Qualified Low-Income Community Business. This is a business that's located in a low-income qualifying census tract. Do not pass go. That project has to be located in one of those census tracts. There is another way of doing it called a targeted population project. It's very complicated. We don't use that structure. So first and foremost, is the project in a low-income census tract? And it's every 10 years when there's a new census, we'll get different mapping, and it's not a perfect science. Unfortunately, there have been really, really good projects that just happen to be right across the street in another census tract, or that one lone project that's in a commercial corridor that doesn't qualify. There are some ways around it, but essentially, to qualify for the program, it needs to be in a census tract that has poverty rate in excess of 20%, or less than 80% of AMI. And census tracts are larger, as you know, in more rural areas, and much smaller in more metropolitan areas. Once that loan is made by the CD, by us, into the project benefits by being able to monetize the tax credits. This is essentially a tax credit program. It's a 39% tax credit, and it is paid back to whoever that tax credit investor is over 7 years. That is the compliance period, 7 years. And then at the end of 7 years, there will be an unwind. There will be essentially a refinancing event. So this is shorter term financing. So you may be thinking, well, that's pretty short, 7 years. What's the real benefit there? After 7 years, this project now has equity because the portion of that tax credit doesn't have to be repaid. It's not forgiven. It uses this put call feature. That's a legally compliant way of not having to pay it back. But so essentially the project is initially seeking, think of it as down payment assistance to go out and attract other conventional capital. And then after 7 years, it can refinance. It has now built up that 20, 30, 40% of equity and will have an easier time, presumably, of seeking more conventional financing, tax exempt bonds, whatever else the project wants to do. Let me stop there. We're going to go a little deeper and in some ways review this material, but I just want to make sure that there's no immediate questions or something just went completely over everybody's head. It looks like we're good. Thank you so much for all the introductions here. It looks like a really great group.
Hey, John, this is Josh again. I'm just gonna speak, take a moment to speak for the group in that we have a mixed group here, and I think so far this material, you know, is at the level that I think we can handle.
Okay.
Acronyms, all of that, I'd encourage you to at least spell it out at least once, and then yeah, just that, that we do, part of our activity here is about trying to level set across a range of community members who may or may not have, finance background. So anytime you can help kind of, speak in the layman's terms or certainly spell out the acronyms, that's beneficial for the group.
Sure. Happy to do that. I appreciate that too. This is designed to be 101 for anyone who has had no experience with the program.
You're doing great so far, so thank you. Oh, looks like you got a question too.
Okay. Does the business need to be a for-profit? No. In fact, most of the sponsors that we've worked with have been nonprofits. So there's no restriction there. For-profit entities use it for job creation, manufacturing, obviously would be more of generally a for-profit sponsor. In the healthcare and education space, and we'll go through some projects at the end. Those are all nonprofit sponsors.
Yeah, and for the benefit of the group, if you recall, and we do have some information and a recording on this one, when we did, I think, our first deep dive session on the Carson Block building in Eureka, this was a project that leveraged this tool. So that can be something people reference later.
Great. And yeah, we'll take another quick look back through Carson Block. It was one of the first projects that we were involved in about a decade ago, a very exciting one. It was actually featured in some of the New Markets Coalition's materials when they go to Washington, D.C. to educate, the senators and Congress folks. Okay. So new market tax credit eligibility. I mentioned the 20% minimum threshold for the census tract. We're going to go a little deeper because in reality, you need to be in a highly distressed census tract. But before we get there, what kind of business? It's a great segue, for-profit, nonprofit. It can be used for real estate. It's often used for real estate to acquire, refinance, headquarters, a variety of different building types. It can be used for equipment. It can be used for operating loans for businesses. And so it has a very wide range of uses. It cannot be used for LIHTC affordable housing projects because there's another existing tool. And so it doesn't cross over into that space. It could be used in conjunction with affordable units for like a first floor retail, condoed out, other portions of a project. And then obviously the typical sin exceptions would be not be able to use the program, liquor stores, golf courses, country clubs, things of that such. Okay, so I gave you the bare minimum for what is a low income census tract, 20% poverty and 80% AMI. But there's then the highly distressed census tract, and almost every CDE that has allocation is going to commit to only using it for projects in highly distressed census tracts. And so that steps up the poverty level to 30%. AMI goes down to 60% of AMI, and then it adds this other characteristic of having unemployment that's 1.5 times the national average. And so by ticking any of those boxes, you meet the threshold for highly distressed. However, there's a fourth that we don't often talk about because there's not that many non-metropolitan designated counties in California. I'm so excited to talk to all of you today because you represent those rare regions. We think more counties should be designated non-metropolitan, but the counties comprised of this group are deemed non-metropolitan. So any project in a normal low-income census tract, 20% poverty and 80% AMI, if it's in one of those 4 counties, it automatically qualifies as highly distressed. Did that make sense, or was let me know if that wasn't clear.
How about once again, just yeah, let's revisit that one once more. So we're saying that for the RISE counties with these criteria there, they would qualify to access these dollars.
So any project in the RISE counties, as long as it meets the minimum program eligibility, the 20% poverty and 80% AMI, if it's in one of those census tracts, it's considered highly distressed. And so it would qualify for nearly any CDE that's looking at the project. It doesn't have to meet the 30% poverty level or 60% AMI or these other 3 criteria to be deemed highly distressed. Pretty much everywhere else in the state, they're looking at ticking off one of these additional criteria.
Right.
Okay. So I mentioned the competitive nature of the program. I'm not going to go through all of this here, but you can see on the slide here that we're looking for, obviously, projects that are shovel ready. There's a timing component. It's very hard to predict when CDEs are going to get awards. That's probably one of the biggest flaws in the program, if you will, is that when we apply, it takes about 11 months that we wait for awards to come out. And as a project sponsor, it's very, very challenging to try and sync up your readiness with that of U.S. Treasury, because we don't often know when they're going to release the awards. The project's going to want to have its other financing sources ready to go. So the new market tax credit's one component, and you're going to see in the next slide or two how it fits in with other funding sources. A lot of nonprofits will have capital campaigns and contribute cash to their project. They will have other grants. For instance, the healthcare sector, they'll have grants from HRSA, Health and Human Services. There may be other conventional loans from a bank or a CDFI, and they can all fold into the new markets structure for whatever particular project is being sought. The third one here is most important for the CDEs, and you will hear this a lot. It's called the but-for test. It's not limited to us. It's limited to any CDE out there. We look at this pretty seriously. But for the new market tax credit subsidy, this project could not move forward. It doesn't otherwise have the capital or access to capital or other funding sources in order to proceed. And so therefore, the new market tax credit, it becomes a really critical component between go and no go for the project. It's not a way to increase the yield for investors in some new project if it's a for-profit entity. or it's not a way, it can't be used if there is another equally accessible funding source that would provide the same impacts back to the community. So this is the most important one there, the but-for test. We, in addition to our governing board, and every CDE has this too, they'll have a separate advisory board of industry professionals, folks from all over the state that represent low-income communities in some capacity. And they also evaluate projects looking at, most importantly, this but-for test. Okay, so here, this is the most simplistic chart that I can use to show you how this money moves throughout the project. So right here, you have a lender. What we're gonna use for this is a hypothetical $10 million project. That's the overall project cost. So healthcare sponsor is going to acquire a new building and build out new facilities to increase their access to a low-income population, to have greater access to healthcare, dental, mental health, increasing their footprint. And it costs $10 million. And they have $0. They don't have any grants, or they don't have any other funding sources. So it's difficult to go out and get a bank or a CDFI to lend the entire $10 million. And that's where the new market tax credit comes in. They have a lender that will lend $7.5 million. And so they have a gap there. The new market tax credit becomes the gap. So we're right here. The sub CDE is us. That is CSCDC. And the reason it says sub CDE is just that a separate LLC is created for every individual project. I mentioned the Qualic B that's going down here. That's the quality, the community low-income qualified low-income community business. And that is the project sponsor. And so the sub CDE is us. The Qualic B is the sponsor down there. And so right above here, you have investment fund, which we haven't talked about yet. Investment fund is how we get the additional lending sources into the capital stack, as well as a tax credit investor. CSCDC and most CDEs, they serve as a conduit. We don't have tax liability. We don't need the tax credits. And so those are exchanged to a NMTC investor. You see here, over here. So CDCDE is CSCDC, that's us or any other CDE. Going backwards is the sub CDE, that's just the entity we set up for this particular project. Qualic B is the sponsor, the manufacturer, the healthcare center, community college. And then up on the top line, we have lender, which is going to be the remainder of our lending sources. Investment fund is where all the money comes in together. And then we have our new market tax credit investor. That is typically a large bank. In California, the largest tax credit investors are JP Morgan Chase, US Bank, Capital One, Wells Fargo, PNC Bank. And they will purchase the tax credits. And that's what gets the additional investment into the project. So now I'm going to go over here in the box there. We've got the lender willing to loan $7.5 million, and we need another $2.5 million. That comes from the new market tax credit. We have a $10 million allocation for this project. So the allocation provided by the CDE covers the entire project, not just the small portion of the NMTC. And so in exchange for $10 million of allocation, that will create $3.9 million in tax credits over a 7-year period. I mentioned earlier, it's a 39% tax credit over 7 years. So that $3.9 million is available. Now, the new market tax credit investor is going to have fees and costs, and then also its return. It's looking at this like it would any other loan. And so at the end of the day, we use rough math and equate that to a net subsidy of $2.5 million. And this is just for easier math. In some years, it's more, in some years, it's less, depending on how those tax credits are being priced and traded. So we have $2.5 million in equity coming in from the NMTC, and then we have a $7.5 million loan from the CDFI who's going to also support this project. Now we have our $10 million. One came in as debt, the other one comes in as equity. So you're wondering, well, how does that work in the investment fund? Even though this is an equity program, for all intents and purposes, it is converted into a debt instrument. And so that $2.5 million that's comprised of the new market tax credit is essentially lent to the project at 0% interest. And that's in addition to not having to be repaid at the end of the compliance period. So we have here now what I'm doing, I'm down to number 5 and number 6 here. So in number 5, we've got market rate terms on that $7.5 million. So whatever the CDFI fund is going to charge. But on the $2.5 million, it's generally 0% or very, very low. That gets blended into a significantly lower interest rate during the 7-year period. And then at the end of 7 years, the portion that's $2.5 million, you as the sponsor, the Qualic B, become both the lender and the borrower. So it's not forgiven, but it's put by the CDE back to the Qualic B, to the sponsor, and so essentially it goes away. It is a taxable event, the initial value of that for a for-profit entity like a manufacturer, on the value of that essentially forgiven. But there's no other costs or tax consequences. Obviously, it likely wouldn't apply for a 501c3 borrower. Okay, I'm going to stop here on this chart, and I'm going to go back and make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, how do we get on someone's list to get new markets tax credits? So it's a small universe of CDEs, and so how do project sponsors become aware of it? We often get referrals from community development directors, from cities and counties, from banks, from existing banking relationships, and just being kind of on the radar of the CDE community. There's only so many here in California. We look at projects all throughout the year, 12 months throughout the year. Doesn't matter if we have allocation or we don't have allocation. And so it is essentially an ongoing program, throughout the year. We've got another question here. I mentioned light tech, which favors less risk, bigger projects, and result challenging for developers in rural. What is the risk appetite to NMTCs? That is a good question. So the CDE is not underwriting the underlying real estate. It's underwriting the actual ability of the borrower to remain in compliance throughout the compliance period. I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. The tax credit investor is not underwriting the actual real estate. All they care about is that this project is going to remain in compliance for 7 years, and there won't be what's called a recapture event. Which means there's a problem, they didn't use the funds correctly. The penalties are pretty severe. But to answer your question about risk, there's less risk considerations under this program than, say, a housing project. You still have certain considerations like CRA credit and others that would, perhaps benefit projects in the city areas versus rural areas. I know at least for us, and I know other CDEs actively seeking out projects in the underserved areas of the state. So as long as with that infusion of new market tax credits, this project is going to be able to repay its debt during the 7-year compliance period, it's an easier benchmark to meet, if you will. I want to make sure I didn't miss any other questions here. Are there other questions on this chart? The way that I try to simplify this is $10 million project. You're getting $2.5 million for free. That's not paid back. And even during the 7 years, you're paying 0% interest on that money. So kind of for my early comments about this being a pretty rich, deep subsidy, it's incredibly attractive, and it does, meet that for many projects that otherwise are not getting looks from any banks or CDFI funds or anyone else. Okay, and we can go back to this at any time if there's questions at the end, or I'm just taking a look at time here. Okay, we're good. All right, so I told you how great this program is. What are the limitations? So there are some limitations with the program, and it's interesting. Even in the for-profit space, there's been a couple projects early on where at the end of the day, that sponsor just didn't want to have to deal with all of the compliance and reporting, and ultimately chose not to use the program. That's very rare. These dollars are often worth the whatever potential headaches there are for, and I shouldn't say headaches, but there's a community benefit agreement that's executed in connection with every project, and those sponsors have to report annually on how they're meeting those goals of providing community impacts to low-income populations. So the first bullet point here, we get this question a lot, is, oh, this sounds great. Can you pair this with tax-exempt bonds? And I wish we could more often, but we typically can't, because you have different investors that have different interests in the project. So during that 7-year compliance period, the tax credit investor, something goes wrong, they lose the entire value of that tax credit. And so if you have bondholders, and let's say there's a foreclosure, there's another problem, the tax credit investor cannot afford bondholders, or frankly anyone else, to foreclose on the project during that 7 years, or otherwise, exercise, certain types of remedies. And so that can be challenging. There's certain banks that just can't get comfortable with that structure. The good thing now, this program is not new, and there are enough banks and CDFIs out there that we haven't really encountered problems finding that additional, what we call the leverage loan. That's the other dollars that come into the capital stack. Limited refinancing potential for 7 years. You basically can't really do it. So I don't know that that's the biggest limitation. 7 years is pretty short term. So we haven't really seen issues with that. You can't sell the property. You're really locked into that 7-year period of terms and financing. And then the last one is, we do get inquiries from time to time for smaller projects. I use $7 million. I used to use $10 million. I mean, we've done some smaller projects in the $7 million range. You can't really go much lower. And when I mean 7 million, I mean that's the total project costs. And there are ways to include other costs into a project to kind of meet that minimum threshold. When you get much lower than that, there are certain fixed costs with the program for attorneys and accountants and a lot of the professionals, where you're just diluting the subsidy. And so the net subsidy of the project would become more minimal for a project that was only $3 or $4 million. So I would say this $7 million is a pretty good rule of thumb for most CDEs. There are a couple national CDEs that have put together this microfinance CDE tool. It's not something that we do. I don't know that much about it. I think it's exciting for, in a way of being able to facilitate projects in that maybe $2 to $4 million range. But $7 million is a good rule of thumb when you're looking at projects. Okay, mixed use real estate. So I mentioned earlier that it's not a good complement for light tech. Actually says it right there on this slide as well. But you can have rental income, residential rental income. It just can't be the entire project. And so if you have a mixed use project, and we did one in Imperial County early on, you just have to have at least 20% of the revenues coming from whatever commercial component of that project. And the mixed use project is pretty popular. We haven't done another one recently in about 10 years, just because of our focus being on those three pillars of our program. But a lot of other CDEs will work on mixed use type of projects, commercial centers, food deserts. They'll put in grocery stores with other retail type establishments. Okay, so I'm going to go into some projects, but I think this is a good time to also stop, and we can go back to other earlier slides or ask other questions. So I'm going to stop here and give everyone a minute or so. Just chime in. I think everyone can probably unmute themselves or use the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with, and then we'll look at some real world situations.
So, John, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm Ross Welch with Arcade Economic Development Corporation. So we were there at the very beginning for the Carson Block building, the very beginning, and we just were there when they unwound it in December. And I have to compliment you. Your slides don't have anywhere near the arrows that the slides I have for that one. And just to add excitement, that had new market tax, or pardon me, historic tax credits as well, which crazy times crazy does not make it easier. So so one suggestion to anyone who wants to kind of know about the background, they should talk to Greg Gear or Chris Byfield at NCIDC. So I've been looking at new markets tax credits since then. And truly, they're so complicated. No one really knows. But if you look at your numbers there on a 10 million example, there's $1.4 million that goes to those who put these together, who have the credits and the attorneys and stuff. And we work with them, and they're amazingly smart and not as organized as you might think, but it works. It really does work. So and every once in a while, every couple of years, someone says, you did new market tax credits. How does that work? So we have talked to many different, I'll say groups, but like, shoot, what's the big CDFI in California in the north part? Shoot, I lost
This
Clearinghouse.
Clearinghouse, sure.
And we even looked at, because we're a CDFI, we can be a CDE, but they're very competitive. And so if you don't get it for a year or two, you've got your program ready to go with no money coming in and all that stuff. So I've gone through this a couple times, and then why don't we hook up? So I checked with Clearinghouse, and they get a lot. They get them kind of steady, but then they don't get them for 3 years, and then they get them again. So my question was, how do we, in our area, get on somebody's list at the beginning? So the Carson Block building, and before that, we had the Open Door Clinic here in Eureka, which got new markets, but they did the same thing. They got them off the shelf after it was done. And the reason why they were able to get it, they had them lined up for that one because we're in a poor area. It's a medical clinic, it's sort of like, ooh, it's off the chart for that. So everybody from New York wants to do it. We didn't have any help before we got to that, but after it was done, everybody lined up. So how do we get at the beginning without us, AEDC, becoming a CDE? Because that is just so mind-numbingly hard. And then you mentioned our whole area is rural. So we have a priority, but then they don't want the smaller ones, which I understand that as well. And I think we could have a number of projects over 10 million if we could do some mixed use and stuff. So what is our best, and you guys are fairly new, 10 years, right? 10, 11, 12, 14.
So we started the program creation in 2010.
Okay.
Program started 10 years prior to that.
For me, that's kind of new, but because it really takes a long time to kind of get in these, but it's really valuable. So in shopping around, when I say we, I mean our 6-county area fit the rural part that the 20% set aside used to have. I don't know if it's even that way, and it fits, but how do we hook up at the beginning so when we have some projects that we know are coming down, how do we get on like your list or who's the best? Because on other groups, they say, oh yeah. And then they find out it's only 15 million. Well, see you around. But how do we do that?
So good question. So Clearinghouse is a similar CDE. They're a multi-state CDE. We have worked on multiple projects with them. I mentioned $7 million at the low end. A lot of projects need 20 million or 30 million. And so we cooperate with other CDEs very regularly. For some of those larger projects, each will contribute a certain amount of money. The best way is, again, the Clearinghouse. There's Community Vision, which used to be NCCLF, Northern California Community Loan Fund. Send projects, even the very beginning stages of projects, to those CDEs all throughout the year. Send me projects all throughout the year, because not only are we waiting for, when we're waiting for allocation, in our applications, we talk about a potential pipeline of projects. And so these are projects that may be in the earlier stages. They're not ready to go. They may be 2 years out, but we will describe those projects for the fund to illustrate, give us the allocation. We've got really great projects. I think as far as the North State, and we'll talk about Open Door, that was one of our other earlier projects. We have other routes through our advisory board, in the northern part of the state, and so we'll hear about projects in the region. So we have Rural Coast Regional Action, Kathy Moxon.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know Kathy, but she's on our advisory board.
We know them all.
Yeah.
And NCCLF, which is Community Visions, they participated with us like in the Hoopa grocery store, but that was the BIA guarantee. But they actually did the gap financing for the historic tax credits on the Carson Block building, because we didn't have enough money to do it. But yeah, is there some way to get on the list? Who do we partner up with? Because I keep changing.
It's just communicating with the CDEs regularly throughout the year about projects. I would say that's the easiest way of doing it. I'll give you an example. So we have a project that we just put in our last application in Lake County for Adventist Health. We issue lots of tax-exempt bonds for Adventist Health, and they have some smaller clinics that they're looking at using new markets. So this is a project that's not ready to go yet. We don't even know if we're going to get allocation in the next round, but we talked to them about it, and it's now being it's in our application to the fund as a potential future project. So there's never too early a time to talk. I think the CDEs are best. The investors, the banks, they don't really want to talk to you until you've got something, a little more concrete, timing wise. So I would say CDEs early and often.
It's just that our area has, I think, some projects that fit what the CDEs need, the 20% or whatever. So yeah. So just knowing the pathway, who to talk to. I mean, I've gone back to some of these places are kind of big, and like, well, who's the person? Who's the keeper of the flame? So for you guys, of course, you just call.
Yep.
You
can call me. You can send an email at any time. Okay. You can, we try to do a little more outreach, just because we're sponsored by Cal Cities and CSAC, in getting information out to cities and counties, making community development departments aware of the program. It's been around for 20 years, the program, and there's still a lot of people that have never heard of it. So we could probably all do a better job of getting that out. But I would say early and often talking to CDEs. If you want contacts at the other CDEs that I know are active in California, I'm happy to provide those as well. And again, you illustrate a good point. Clearinghouse, I remember when they got shut out 3 years in a row, because then we got shut out, or maybe we were first. I can't remember.
Right.
And, it's terribly depressing. Everyone says there's not a political, there's no political influence in this program, and I've seen it for a long period of time, and it's hard for me to accept that and swallow that. But I think, most recently, at least for us, the theme that we've been promoting with the fund, they've been receptive. And so hopefully we'll just continue to keep it going.
Good.
Yeah, this is Josh here. I just, I'm looking for sort of the general lesson aspect, and one that occurs to me, again, we've heard this throughout our activity, is that these development and redevelopment and economic development projects occur over multi-year, even decadal, timescales. And so just the importance of, a continual kind of drip practice, communication, like you're saying, early and often, building awareness of projects with key constituents, all of that contributes to a project becoming real. These don't just happen overnight. And I think that is, even within the context of the Jobs First program and the funding and the time pressures and all that, we're really just going to be kind of surfacing the opportunities, spurring on a few more steps and hopefully getting some real wins, but setting the stage for long-term stuff. And I think that's just a good message to reinforce throughout this effort. Yeah, that's my general lesson for the moment. Thank you.
Well said, Josh. Thank you. Okay, so, we got it. Yeah, another question.
Yeah. Hey, John, this is Brian Coleman. I'm with Go.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting. This is all wonderful information. I'm the place-based incentive specialist, and the new market tax credit is one of the incentive programs within my purview that I advise communities and other entities across the state on. So this is a good little refresher for myself. But one question I just wanted to ask, going back to one of your earlier slides, you listed a couple industry sectors, I believe healthcare, education, and manufacturing that you will provide NMTC financing for. Do you do other industry sectors as well?
Within the new markets program?
Yeah.
Those are the three areas that we're currently focusing on. There
Okay.
are other CDEs that only do for sale single family homes,
Okay.
subsidized homes, or they only do retail type projects. So we found over the last decade or so that these are most impactful. And then again, for us is trying to spread the love around throughout the state in areas that are not otherwise served by another CDE.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'm going to go through a couple. Actually, are there any other questions before we're going to go through a few projects? Okay. So this is where it all began, up in the northern part of the state. This was obviously our second allocation award. So this, I think, would have been 2013, 2014. The Carson Block building. I'm not going to go through this in detail. You had a separate presentation on it. Exciting program, again, highlighted nationally, and our first foray into the northern part of the state through new markets. The project shortly after that, in the same allocation round, was Open Door that Ross mentioned. And this is an interesting project because it was a refinancing. That's an eligible use of the program. Sometimes the timing doesn't work out perfectly, but because of the refinancing and the tremendous savings, converting to the new markets financing, they were able to spread their funds and expand other clinics and create jobs and provide additional access to that underprivileged community. And so if it doesn't entirely work out, we've seen projects where there's a refinancing and new money as part of the same project, where there's a refinancing and some additional equipment. And so there's flexibility in how I don't want anyone to think it's just for brand new ground up construction. There are other uses. There's equipment only new market tax credit projects where there isn't any real estate. Okay, so now what we're going to do, so those are the earlier projects. I wanted to highlight them because those are the two that are up in the northern states. We're in the process of closing a project for Pitt River Tribe in Bernie. We've been working on that for a year and a half, I believe. It's very complicated. BIA involvement, USDA. There's been a lot of starts and stops, but we're at the finish line on that. We've got a new project we're going to kick off in Siskiyou this week. And so we're continually excited about seeing projects. Kathy's great. Susan Stroth, who's also in the Shasta, in the Reading area. She's also on our advisory board and helps keep us aware of projects in the northern part of the state. So these next projects were all closed within the last couple years with our more recent allocation. So I just want to give you a sense of what other project types can new markets be used for. So after we got shut out for 3 years, then we got our first award, and then we got the past 3 years. This is Elica Health. We've done a lot of FQHCs, federally qualified healthcare centers, that do receive federal dollars. They do not receive enough. You're going to see some community colleges on these slides as well, where you may think, well, don't they receive enough money from the state? And they do not. So this was our first project in the Sacramento area, at least for our CDE. We go visit all of our projects. They were in this old kind of decrepit space, totally rehabbing it, and then acquiring the building next door. And then we went and looked at, they had used New Markets for another project prior to, and we went and took a look at that. And it is tremendous what they were able to do as far as hiring new physicians, new clinic space, new treatment rooms. And so you'll see there, FQHC is pretty straightforward as far as community impacts, because you're looking at the additional patient population that they're able to serve. But job creation is still a part of every single project. And so if you look at the bottom of this slide here, 100 new and retained permanent jobs. When we're looking at jobs, we're not just looking at job creation or construction jobs, we're looking at quality jobs. And they have to demonstrate wages, other benefits, the percentage of jobs that are going to be available to local population, those without a college degree. It's all very detailed. Our board sees all of that in our staff reports. Brian can attest to that. It's a pretty detailed vetting process. So this was our, and we did quite a number of other FQHCs since Elica, which was just 2 years ago. But this is a really, I don't want to say easy, but very worthy use of NMTCs in the healthcare space. I mentioned community colleges. We have done financings for West Hills Community College, 2 of them for College of the Desert out in Indio, and then this project we closed last year up in Reading for Shasta Community College. This is a really fascinating, exciting project where this new facility is going to provide training for early childhood education, and also to a student population that in order to, go to school needs early childhood help. And so childcare. And so this new project here is kind of like a double whammy. It was an exciting project. Again, early on, you think, well, why? These are state community colleges. They do not receive enough money from the state to do new and innovative, offer innovative types of programs or expand the way that they need to serve an ever-growing student population. And again, you'll see additional jobs being created there as part of all of these projects. This is the Renewal Center. This is in Chico. And this is an interesting, this was a homeless-oriented project. So it has a shelter for those that are currently unhoused, as well as providing resources, medical care, job training, other crisis services. So this is creating new jobs in the Chico area, and obviously meeting the needs of a very underprivileged population. You'll see a lot of multifaceted type projects. We did a project very early on near Oakland for a refugee assistance type nonprofit, and they were providing housing, job training, community kitchen, really healthy food access. So you'll have kind of multifaceted components to a lot of projects as well. This is College of the Desert. This was the first project. We actually participated with Clearinghouse and 4 or 5 other CDEs in the second project for COD, and that was, I think, about a $70 million project, one of the largest, at least I've ever seen. But they're able to significantly expand their operations and student services there. So this was the first project. This was, I think, 2 years ago in College of the Desert. So you'll see some recurring themes of job training and the education space, healthcare, federally qualified healthcare centers, and then manufacturing. So manufacturing, it's no secret that it is challenging to retain manufacturers in the state of California. It's not often the easiest environment from a tax and regulatory standpoint for manufacturers. This project was for Fire Clay Tile, a tile manufacturer down in Aromas, which is in San Benito County, high poverty rate. This is the largest employer in the county outside of the county, and they were ready to leave the state. They were headed off to Utah, I believe. They had Idaho asking, come here. And it was so critically important for the Fire Clay to stay. I mean, they had hundreds of employees, and they were able to use new market tax credits to expand their operations and retain their business locally where they had been for many, many years. 400 created and retained permanent jobs there. So pretty significant. A lot of interaction with the county and the county EDC. We love that in all of our projects. We probably spend a little more time talking to the cities and counties about projects just because of our sponsorship as a joint powers authority. We love talking to city and county executives, elected officials. Why is this project important? How will it impact your constituents and your community? So Fire Clay was a pretty exciting one. Manufacturing projects are hard. We're always looking for them. They're probably the most challenging sector, at least for us. Another project up in Redding. So Shasta Community Health Center was actually the first project, I believe, that we ever closed back in 2012 or 2013. And then 10 years later, they came back. We had unwound their early transaction a few years ago, and they had a new maternity center. And so it was very exciting to work with a lot of the same folks. Their CEO just retired after, I think, 35 years. And here they were able to use new markets to expand across the street, provide maternity services, and for infants and children as well. Again, another great use by an FQHC. The next two I'll go through quickly. These are also FQHC projects for Ampla Health. These were 2 sister projects, one in Marysville and then one right across the river there in Yuba City. These are areas that are often overlooked by other CDEs. They're not going to get attention by a national CDE or maybe a multi-state CDE. You see there in this slide here, 92% of their patients low income, so they were able to expand operations and as well as create some jobs. This was the sister project there, 171 new and retained FTEs. This was a larger of the 2 projects across the way in Yuba City. Sorry, my clicker got stuck. Okay. This project was just closed a few months ago, at the end of last year. FIELD, the Farm Workers Institute of Education and Leadership. This is a job training project in Bakersfield that's providing training in areas where there's a significant need for new trained employees. And so you'll see kind of the sectors there: recycling, construction, firefighting, agriculture, early childhood education, natural resources, solar. These are all areas that are continuing to grow. So they're training It's often job retraining for certain individuals that may have lost their job due to technology or otherwise. So this was an exciting project that you can see fits within our education component. And I think that was the last one. So I guess we still have a little bit of time. I want to stop again and answer questions about the projects, anything we talked about earlier. I can go back to any of the slides and just open it back up.
Hey, John, Josh again. Guess I'm the one asking the questions today. Can you talk a little bit more about the manufacturing retention project? Like, why is it challenging? Why are manufacturing projects challenging for you as in the new market tax credits?
They're not challenging for us as a project type. I would say just from what we've seen over the years, they are challenging for the manufacturers themselves. So, and it's twofold. I mentioned that there were certain, like, I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, there was a project out in rural Tulare County for a large dairy corporation, and it was going to provide the impacts and the job creation, but they ultimately didn't want to deal with all of the leaps and bounds of the program. And so they chose not to use the program. These are generally for-profit sponsors versus the 501(c)(3)s that you see elsewhere. But the other thing I alluded to is there's just not a lot of growing manufacturing in California. You're seeing other states, for whatever reason, that's above my pay grade, are a more attractive environment for manufacturers to expand. I don't know if it's tax incentives or it's just less regulation or just lower cost. And so
all of the above, yeah.
Yeah, probably. So that's just something that we found, but we're actively always seeking them out because others may not. And I mean, the fire clay tile, but for new market tax credits, they would be in Utah and 400 people would have lost their job.
Right.
So I think it's important to continue to try and that's a sector that's harder to educate. I think that's where, cities and counties and community development departments can be helpful in talking to folks within their communities. We get a lot of, not a lot, but we get inbounds where we'll just get on the phone and chat with a sponsor. They never even heard of this before. Again, we try to simplify it and stay here in this community or move to this community for your operations, and you're going to get some, arguably a pretty attractive subsidy and win-win.
Yeah, so I like this both from the sort of business attraction potential as well as sort of the business expansion. And I think, both of those will, help grow the job base, but it's nice to know. I wasn't aware that these could be used in those situations. So that's interesting. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions, or you want to go back to an earlier slide?
John, have you done any mixed use type new market tax credits for a project like, retail on the first floor, and maybe, I know they don't want the housing part, but I mean like low to moderate housing combined with other stuff. Have you guys ever done something like that?
We did. In our very first allocation award, it was a project called Worthington Square in Imperial, down on the opposite end of the state from all of you. And that had some apartments and it had some commercial space. They're a little more complicated, those projects. There are other CDEs that focus more in that area. for basically in our application, we tell the fund what we're going to do. And so we're somewhat bound by that. And so these three areas, that's what we're focusing on right now. But there are, other CDEs like Community Vision and Clearinghouse. There's also the nationals, LISC, Local Initiative Services Corporation. There's LIFT, the Low Income Investment Fund. There are, they'll probably look at a wider variety of project types, and they're not limited as far as geography.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. There's we were looking in Eureka, like a big cold storage facility, an ice plant maybe, but then Fort Bragg and Crescent City might look at the same kind of things. Those fit in new market tax credits, I believe.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at the chat here. Susan, I saw your comment. Thanks so much. Yeah, Kathy's great. Kathy's been with us since the very beginning. And, we've had people come on and off the advisory board, but she's just been so fantastic, always sending project ideas. She's got a really keen eye when she's evaluating our projects as an advisory board member. So I hope she stays with us forever.
She is a mentor of ours, but also used to be an executive director of our organization. So we're very tight.
Great. That's great.
Yeah, I concur with Susan's assessment there that, a lot of times with these, there's a lot to take in. And I know a lot of people here and in the community connected with the folks here are thinking about projects. And so this, for me even has been quite eye-opening. And so I think will help us as we work through what is, what priorities the community wants, and then be able to kind of link them in with tools like this one. So thank you very much, John, for making the time and giving such a great overview. We do record these sessions, and so we'll have that available for people to look back to, as well as your slide deck.
Oh, great.
And I expect that this won't be the last time you'll be hearing from us and from the RISE community about on this particular program. So
Great.
Much appreciated. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the time. If you have questions, I agree. This is the simplest way to. Oh, we have another question.
You have a hand clap. It looks
I have
like
a hand up for. Is it Layla? No. Okay.
No, it wasn't. My head's spinning and I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, of course. I will tell you, I've been aware of this program for a long time, and I still learn new things. It can be overwhelming. Ross mentioned an org chart. He saw an org chart for an unwind. That project we just did with 7 CDEs for College of the Desert.
Yeah.
The closing org chart, the book from Novogradac, the accounting firm, I think was 392 pages. I used to have some slides that would have more arrows and more boxes and more acronyms, and it just doesn't do anybody any good service. But that being said, you're spot on. It takes some time to sink in. You can reach out to me anytime, phone, email, if you want to talk more about the program one-on-one. If you have a project idea, if you want to connect me to someone in your community, we do this all the time. So please don't be shy. Going back to the.
Okay, well, I think that would about wrap it up, John. So
Okay.
Thanks again for your time. Thanks everybody for hanging in there and taking this into digestion. And we will package it up and get it online soon. And look forward to reconnecting with this group on a regular meeting schedule in 2 weeks. And some folks, yeah, I think that's where I'll close it. So thanks a lot, John. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Really appreciate it. Thanks.